Talk Radio.
Constitutionalists, welcome to the Monday edition of the Dan Clemens Show, a Christian political talk show. This is episode 799. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is Monday, May 15th, the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we are a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God's still in control and he does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. Chat room's open over at the Blog Talk Radio. I'm live on there. The chat room is also open over at my YouTube channel. I do apologize for not doing the show this morning, and for whatever reason, I was having a hard weekend over the weekend with my fibromyalgia, having a lot of pain and not much sleep. And I forgot all about the doctor's appointments I had to go to this morning. I got was with rheumatology and then had a bunch of x-rays done to make sure it wasn't something structural that was causing all my pain. So they're still looking, although they're pretty sure it's fibromyalgia. They still got to do more things. This is my first rheumatology examination. So they got to continue to rule things out, although my doctor's pretty sure we're on the right track as far as that goes. I don't normally do a show in the afternoon. I didn't want to skip the day totally, and I didn't have a lot to do this afternoon. I went out and mowed grass and did a couple things out there, and then came in and set up the show. I am going to talk a little bit about net neutrality, like I said on Friday, but that's going to be towards the end of the show because this thing happened this morning with North Carolina's voter ID law being not heard by the Supreme Court. Now, all the anti-freedom, lamestream media, Democratic supporting websites are out there are calling us a total defeat for the law, and it's not. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. And this is just how they're going to spin this whole thing. And the one thing, Wisconsin had a law that was upheld, voter ID law. Texas is still going through theirs, voter ID law. Now North Carolina, originally, it was upheld at the state level, and then as it was going through the federal courts, it wasn't. It was said it was discriminatory. And I read, we talked about this last year or so when this actually happened with North Carolina. I do have it's called Berger and Moore Respond to Politically Motivated Ruling Blocking Voter ID. And I want to read that one to you again. I know we talked about it, maybe not this particular article by the administration over at philipberger.org, but it's important to note something at the end of this article here that we're going to talk about. But this will, like I said, this is definitely going to be in the news. This is going to be all over the progressive anti-freedom blogosphere, news sites out there on the internet, and they're going to get it wrong. They're absolutely going to get it wrong, and they continue to get these things wrong. They continue to bring out the race card, which I try not to get upset about things, but this is really, really infuriating because people who we're talking about progressives, Democrats, social justice tyrants out there, the anti-freedom groups out there that are pushing this agenda to keep voter IDs out of there. They want you to believe that it's race. Now a couple things with that narrative is, one, they think everybody that's of race, which everybody is of a race, but they're specifically targeting the black community. And not everyone in that community is going to fall for this narrative. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter to the social justice tyrants or the anti-freedom progressives out there. It really doesn't. There's one thing, and I've said this all along, I've said this quite a few times when it comes to their agenda and they're pushing their agenda. They don't go ask the people that they seem to be helping or they say they're going to be helping. They don't go ask the people if they even want their help. They assume that the minority community, I hate using this term, African American community, but the minority communities out there that they're targeting, they assume that they cannot redress their grievances with government on their own. This is an assumption because I've asked of my antagonists on Facebook, on Twitter, and anybody else that has asked me questions about this to show proof that you talked with these folks. That you went out and talked with every one of these folks that you are reportedly defending. Stunned silence. Someone just asked me yesterday on Twitter, did I hear anything back about that AP interview with Donald Trump and Julie Porter? Nope, haven't heard a thing back. I quit asking. They wouldn't answer me, especially Julie Porter. She would not. I direct message her on Twitter a couple different times. Nothing. I quit asking. So I'm running on with the assumption that there is not a video available or audio available. There may be an audio, but they're not making it available to anybody out there. So it's amazing to me how these folks can get this narrative out there and it not be fact checked, and it not be fact checked at all. And whenever I say something, with these groups out here that are pushing like this voter ID and stuff like this, and make no mistake about it, one of those is Let America Vote, which is a George Soros backed through Open Society, which is a George Soros funded and backed group doing this. And a person on Twitter, and here again, they used an avatar and a fake name, and I'm like, okay, you can do that. I don't care, but I don't take you real seriously. Because anybody can hide behind an avatar and say anything they want. Well, you never give any proof. So I went out and I have proof. I have a website that's actually logged in here for that. Let me go over here. I have to look it up again. I have it logged in over here on my toolbar now. Discover the Networks, it's called. That's what it's called. Discover the Networks. And these folks over there went back and through 501(c)(3) filings and their tax, because after tax returns, who they support and stuff like that, did some good work and showed up all these groups that are supporting this. And so when you're out here talking about these things, you need to back up what you're saying. And I try to do that all the time. If someone asks me what my references are, I'll give them to them. Or I'll already have them in the article. 9 times out of 10, the anti-freedom groups out there are not going to read the articles that I post because they'll see that little, the first little thing in their www.toconservative.com, and you can put whatever website you want in there. If they deem that website to be conservative, well, you're just citing from a conservative website, an article, whatever. That's just, they're far right and you can't trust them. I'm like, did you read the article? Did you even go in and look? There's links in the article, and that's what I try to do when I write articles, is actually add links to it, especially when I'm putting the articles up in the on my show notes page at danclementshow.com. Show them the references. And they never, ever, I have yet to have anybody tell me they actually read the whole article and checked out the references. 9 times out of 10, my antagonists will stop at, that's a too far right-leaning website, news source, whatever it is, can't be trusted, so I ain't even going to read it. So they're like, la, 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 la. I should say, la, 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 la. They don't want to hear it, and they don't want to see it, period. And so we have a huge problem in this country, folks. We really do. There's a whole website by the Witherspoon Institute called The Public Discourse, We do not have civil public discourse anymore. And I do believe those in the freedom groups, and I'll consider the conservatives and those mostly on the right. And like I said, I'm getting away from the right-left paradigm. But I consider folks in the anti-freedom side of, or the upper side of the Overton window that is leaning towards freedom, to want to have an honest, open dialogue about these things. Not to just start throwing names up or accusations, well, that's just racist. And that's exactly what's happening today with this ruling. And Chief Justice Roberts said that just because we're not going to listen to it does not mean that we're ruling in favor one way or the other. And we'll get into the problem why they actually decline to hear it right now. And it'll amaze you. It sort of amazed me a little bit, and I got thinking about it. I said, no, and it has something to do with the passing of the torch in the governorship of North Carolina, and who's filing what. So it'll amaze you what's going on here. So this is hitting my news cycle pretty hard. This about North Carolina and the voter ID. To me, I don't think I'm overthinking this. I may just be overthinking it. I don't think I am. I think everybody, or you would think everybody would agree that making the vote accurate is something we all want. It's a no-brainer, right? It's just a no-brainer. If you're eligible to vote, all it takes is a little bit of proof. That's it. They're not asking you they're not asking, and I'm going to say this right now, they're not asking a black man or black woman in North Carolina any more to do. They don't set the bar higher for them than they do for anybody else in North Carolina. Any state that has voter ID laws are not asking any of the minorities that the progressive anti-freedom folks out there are saying are being targeted by this stuff. The ACLU, the Southern, I got it in an article. I'll try to dig that out. Some other Southern Coalition for Social Justice, I think. The Southern Coalition for Social Justice. You know, I never thought I was up on a lot of the latest groups, but that's a new one on me. They're saying that this is a targeted discrimination against the African Americans. It's targeted. But if you read the law, and I have in the past, and I have articles here to back me up on this, they're not asking anybody in North Carolina, regardless of your race, color, ethnic group, any more than anybody else in North Carolina. If you want to vote, show an ID. You can either show it then, or if you don't have it, you sign an affidavit, bring it back in with a certain amount of time. You're done. If you don't have a state ID, one will be provided for you. All you got to do is get there. Well, that's a burden for some folks. And I've said this before. I live in the 10th Congressional, or is it 10th or 11th? I have to look that up again because it changed not too long ago. But anyway, in my congressional district, I put this out. I said, anybody in my congressional district that cannot physically get an ID, I'll take them. The state will pay for it, I'll take them. And then when it comes time to vote, if they can't physically get to the voting poll in their precinct, I'll take them. And there's other people in this district and other congressional districts that would absolutely do the same thing. Absolutely do the same thing. So my question is, if all it is a voter ID, and you're not asking anybody to do any more than anybody else or any less than anybody else, and everybody, no matter, regardless of your race, and we'll just stick with race right now because that's the big accusation right now, regardless of your race, then what's the deal? There has to be something else behind this, folks. There has to be. There has to be something else behind the ACLU. There has to be something else behind the Southern Center for Social Justice, or whatever it's called. There has to be something else behind this. There has to be something else. I was watching this over the weekend, making comments on Facebook and Twitter about this, and this sort of goes along with it. Donald Trump's commission on voter fraud, and I have a lot of articles. I don't have them. I mean, I got the ones I wanted in here today. Voter fraud is real, and here's the proof. Inaccurate, costly, inefficient evidence that America's voter registration system needs an upgrade, and it does. Not unlike other things in this country that need an upgrade. There's an article in here. I won't get to this one, but you can read it if you go over to DanClementShow.com. Are Republicans going to try to steal the 2018 election? And it's how Democrats can roar back, by Ryan Cooper over at theweek.com. A lot of the strategies of the Democrats, the progressive, the anti-freedom folks out there has nothing to do with policy. Nothing whatsoever to do with policy. And when we get into voter fraud a little bit, I don't know how much we're going to get into today. If we don't get into it completely today, we'll definitely get into it tomorrow about this voter fraud. That it's not what you think as far as the numbers. And there's only one narrative that you'll hear from the anti-freedom progressive Democrats out there is the prosecution numbers. And if that's the only numbers you go by, you're spreading a false narrative, and you're literally lying to folks. You really, really are. So we're going to cover a lot today, and so let's get going here. Today's show is being brought to you by Sears Part Direct. Now you heard me talk on the show here recently that our gas cook stove, the oven quit, and we need a new electronic igniter. And I called around quick to see if we had some local. They said they had to order in. I said, let me make some more phone calls. And I thought, you know what? Instead of wasting time, let me go over to Sears Part Direct, because I wanted to get it local, but they didn't have it. So if I was going to order it, I might as well do it through a company that is an affiliate marketer of mine on the DanClementShow.com, and that's Sears Part Direct. And it was hassle-free. I got the serial numbers off the back of the stove, and folks, let me side note here. It's great to have a smartphone with a camera on it because you can just lean down there, take a picture of the label, and then sit back and look at it without having to try to write the numbers down or anything. It's fantastic, smartphones. But anyway, then I went over to Sears Parts Direct, looked up the number, found the cost, put it in the cart, went to check out, put in the offer code 90055, got my 10% off. And then I paid a little extra to have it shipped here quicker because I didn't want to be too long without an oven on the stove, because we do a lot of baking as far as our casseroles and pizzas and stuff like that throughout the week. Fantastic experience. Can't thank them enough. Can't thank Sears Part Direct enough for their having the part there, getting it out to me. It got here on Thursday, put it on Thursday. It worked. Nothing else to say about it. So please, if you like what you hear on the Dan Clement Show and you want the show to continue to go, please go over to the DanClementShow.com and click on Sears Part Direct widget. Sears Part Direct is an affiliate marketer of mine, and they've agreed to allow me to advertise on my show. So I do appreciate that. So if you're the handyman in the family, you might want to try to do that. Okay. Now, today's daily Bible verse comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, verses 3 through 5. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And boy, howdy, folks, over the years since Christ went back up to heaven, since his ascension until now, there have been a lot of kooks out there that said that they were the Christ and led many, many people astray. And you need to be careful about that. You're not going to have to ask any questions when Christ comes back. You will know. Everybody will know when Christ comes back. It's not something that's going to be hidden out in the desert. It's not going to be someone that's going to lead people off into a small separate group. When Christ comes back, you'll know it. Today's quote meal comes from Charles Brent. Intercessory prayer might be defined as loving our neighbor on our knees. And that's a pretty good definition of it, too. Today's short Bible lesson is actually a video you can go watch. It's from Searching for the Truth, and it's about authority in religion. And Searching for the Truth has a series of videos. I highly encourage you to go over and look at that. Matter of fact, if you go down to the bottom of my show notes page, you'll always see a link to Searching for Truth. And they are, it's a fantastic website. These folks did a fantastic job doing the video editing and producing these videos. And they have a lot of good things to say about it. And this one here is about authority in religion. So I encourage you to go to thedanclemenshow.com and click on that link in the show notes. It'll be right top of the show notes for episode 799. And take you right over to it. It's not a very long video, but it's very, very informative. It has a lot of information in there that you can use towards your salvation. Now, I do have, before I get into everything else, I have this, it's Judge Napolitano at his best. He said this a while ago. I don't exactly have the date on it. Doesn't matter. He does a fantastic job of citing things. It's almost like, it's almost prophetic, what he's talking about here. So let me get this turned on here and you'll be able to listen to this.
Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? Tonight, what if the Constitution no longer applied? What if the whole purpose of the Constitution was to limit the government? What if Congress's enumerated powers in the Constitution no longer limited Congress, but were actually used as a justification to extend Congress's authority over every realm of human life? What if the president, meant to be an equal to Congress, has instead become a democratically elected, term-limited monarch? What if the president assumed that everything he did was legal just because he's the president? What if he could interrupt your regularly scheduled radio and TV programming for a special message from him? What if he could declare war on his own? What if he could read your emails and your texts without a search warrant? What if he could kill you without warning? What if Supreme Court justices no longer looked to the Constitution to determine the constitutionality of a law, but rather simply to what justices who preceded them thought about it? What if the rights and principles guaranteed in the Constitution have been so distorted in the past 200 years as to be unrecognizable by the founders? What if the 50 states were no longer sovereign entities, equals to each other, and parents of the federal government they voluntarily constituted? What if the states were mere provinces of a totally nationalized and fully centralized government? What if the Constitution was amended stealthily, not by constitutional amendments duly ratified by the states, but by the constant and persistent expansion of the federal government's role in our lives? What if the federal government decided if its own powers were proper and constitutional? What if the Constitution were no longer the supreme law of the land? What if you needed a license from the government to speak, to assemble, or to protest against the government? What if the government didn't like what you planned to say and so it didn't give you the license? What if the right to keep and bear arms only applied to the government? What if posse comitatus, the federal law that prohibits our military from occupying our streets, were no longer in effect? What if the government considered the military an adequate dispenser of domestic law enforcement? What if cops looked and acted like troops and you couldn't distinguish the military from the police? What if you were not secure in your person, in your papers, and in your property? What if federal agents could write their own search warrants in defiance of the Constitution? What if the government could decide when you were and were not entitled to a jury trial? What if the government could take your property whenever it wanted? What if the government could continue prosecuting you until it got the verdict it wanted? What if the government could force you to testify against yourself simply by labeling you a domestic terrorist? What if the government could torture you until you said what the government wanted to hear? What if people running for president actually supported torture? What if the government tortured your children to get to you? What if government judges and government lawyers intimidated juries into convicting the innocent? What if the government could send you to your death and your innocence meant nothing so long as the government's procedures were followed? What if America's prison population, the largest in the world, was a cruel and unusual way for a country to be free? What if half the prison population never harmed anyone but themselves? What if the people had no rights except those the government chose to let them have? What if the states had no rights except to do as the federal government commanded? What if our elected officials didn't really live among us, but instead all had their hearts and homes in Washington, D.C.? What if the government could strip you of your rights because of where your mother was when you were born? What if the income tax was unconstitutional? What if the states were convinced to give up their representation in Congress? What if the government tried to ban you from using a substance in your body that is older than the government itself? What if voting didn't mean anything anymore because both political parties stand for big government? What if the government could write any law, regulate any behavior, and tax any event? The Constitution be damned. What if the government was the reason we don't have a Constitution anymore? What if you could love your country, but hate what the government has done to it? What if sometimes to love your country, you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if I'm right? What if the government is wrong? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
All right, folks, that was Judge Napolitano. Like I said, I'm not exactly sure how long ago that was. It was last year sometime, if I remember right. It was last year sometime. And he was talking a lot about, he was saying this during the Obama administration. So there was a lot of things he was talking about there that actually apply to the Obama administration in there. I wanted to share that because someone shared that with me on Facebook, and I thought that was great. There's a lot of things he hit the nail on the head, as it were. Well, let's get back to this voter ID. Let's get back to True in the Vote. Let's get back to seeing what's going on here. This is an article from philberger.com. Berger and Moore respond to politically motivated ruling blocking voter ID. Senate, and this is posted back July 29th of last year, and we talked about this when this all happened last year in North Carolina. A lot of things happened in North Carolina last year with the bathrooms and voter ID and all 9 yards. And it was a Republican governor. Now it's a Democratic governor. And so you might be thinking, well, maybe this is where Dan's going with this Supreme Court ruling, and you might be right. Senate Leader Phil Berger, Republican Rockingham, and House Speaker Tim Moore, Republican Cleveland, North Carolina, issued the following joint statement Friday in response to the Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ruling on voter ID. Since today's decision by three partisan Democrats ignored legal precedent, ignores the fact that other federal courts have used North Carolina law as a model, and ignores the fact that a majority of other states have similar protections in place, we can only wonder if the intent is to reopen the door for voter fraud, potentially allowing fellow Democrat politicians like Hillary Clinton and Roy Cooper to steal the election. We will obviously be appealing this politically motivated decision to the Supreme Court. The voter ID law ensures any North Carolina citizen who wants to vote will have the opportunity. The law establishes a list of valid government-issued photo IDs that the voters can present at their polling places, allows anyone without a photo ID to obtain one at no cost through the Department of Motor Vehicles, and allows anyone who still has difficulty obtaining a valid ID to fill out a reasonable impediment affidavit and still have their vote counted. It also brings North Carolina into the mainstream of other states on matters of same-day registration and out-of-precinct voting. More than 30 other states have voter ID requirements, and a similar law was upheld by the United States Supreme Court in 2008. Polls, including those commissioned by groups challenging the law, consistently show the overwhelming majority of North Carolinians support voter ID. And political opponents of the law failed to produce a single witness who was unable to vote under the law in court. And this last part was where I was getting at. During the trials there in the court challenges in North Carolina, the judge turned to the people that brought suit and said, you need to provide proof that anybody out there cannot get a voter ID. and they give them, I can't, it was like a couple weeks to do this, maybe a month. I'm not sure if it was that long. They scoured. They got all their, precincts out, and they were knocking doors and the whole 9 yards. And it come down to it that, if memory serves me right, it came down to it that they found one black elderly woman who didn't have an ID and was sort of unaware about what was going on. And when she was asked about it, would you like to vote? And she says, well, yeah, but I don't have an ID. And when they said, well, we can get you an ID and the state will pay for it, oh, that's wonderful. And they corrected that. It was actually corrected while they were investigating. So the folks that filed this suit in North Carolina could not produce one person in the whole state of North Carolina that couldn't get a voter ID. But this case seems to keep coming back, and they keep throwing up the race card. Oh, it's about race. It's targeted discrimination. And folks, I'm hoping, my ardent prayer is that the American people will wake up to this and see it for what it is. It's political shenanigans by the anti-freedom progressive Democrats in North Carolina and elsewhere in the country. When they talk about voter fraud, it's a victimless crime. How many victimless crimes do they prosecute out there? Now, I will have to say that on the drug side of this, when somebody's using drugs and they're caught using them and they're prosecuted, a lot of those times, and this, I was doing some research yesterday and some reading up on this last night, you can do the same, it's not hard. A lot of these end up in plea deals. They're not even prosecuted. They don't even make it to the court. So a court, so they can have a jury listen to it the whole 9 yards. A lot of times the DAs scare these users so bad that they take the plea deal. So they're not even adjudicated. The same way with, and those are, in my mind, if someone's using drugs and they're not hurting anybody, and I know the arguments about, destroying families and stuff like that, and folks, there's a lot of ways you can destroy families. And they don't prosecute people for that. They don't. At one time, they may have in this country prosecuted folks for adultery, but do they do it now? The only statutory authority I know that still has adultery as being illegal is the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and that has a lot to do with unit cohesion and morale and stuff like that in the units. But I'm going to get away from that. In my mind, and I've said this before on the show, and I think libertarians and other folks use the wrong term here. They say they want to legalize drugs. I think that's the wrong term. They need to decriminalize the use of the drugs. I still think that importing illegal drugs should be illegal and should be prosecuted. But in the same sentence, as Judge Napolitano just said, about 50% of our population in prisons today are victimless crimes. They're usually just drug use. The person wasn't dealing. They were using the drugs personally. And like I said, I know all the arguments about, well, it's not victimless. In a sense, it is. And we can have that discussion if you want some other day. But I think decriminalization on the user's end, instead of throwing them in jail, we need to get them in treatment programs. We don't throw alcoholics in jail unless they hurt somebody, like a vehicular manslaughter or something like that, or driving while under the influence. And even then, my last job, I was working with 4 or 5 folks that had ankle bracelets, or didn't have they were done with their probation, but they had to wait to get their driver's license back because of their DUI, but didn't spend any jail time. A lot of it was in home. They could go back and forth to work, but that was it. They weren't allowed to drive, all that kind of stuff there. But we don't, if someone's an alcoholic, we don't throw them in jail just for being an alcoholic. If someone is addicted to drugs and they're using, we shouldn't be throwing them in jail. We should be helping them out, getting them in Al-Anon or some drug treatment program, something. Okay? So there are other victimless crimes where there's people being prosecuted, but trust me when I tell you, folks, there's a lot of money in prosecuting drug crimes. There really is. And this is This is in the same vein, folks. If there was a lot of money in prosecuting voter fraud, I would dare say that there'd probably be a lot more prosecutions than there are today. But there absolutely isn't, because it is a victimless crime that people, police just are not going to look into it. The people working the polls, they can report these things, but most of the time it doesn't even get reported out of the polling places. And if it's not being, just because it's not being prosecuted doesn't mean it's not going on. And this is the argument on the left, in the anti-freedom progressive groups out there that don't want anything to change with the process now. Did you know it is a crime? These are all federal crimes. It is a crime to turn in fraudulent voter registration cards, going out on voter drives and stuff like that. And Acorn, do we have to go back this far? And this is the problem with dealing with these anti-freedom folks and stuff like that. They want you to do all the work, and you can do the work 100 times, or you can do it once and just share it 100 times, and it still keeps coming up. These people will not go back. It doesn't fit their narrative. And this is why it's so exhausting to deal with these anti-freedom groups. This is racism. And I'm like, I'm tired of that. I'm just flat out tired of that. And I'm challenging anybody that comes up with that actually labels this as racism, these voter ID laws. And Pennsylvania, we tried to pass one. It's still in litigation as far as I know. I was doing a quick check before the show, and it still looks like it's in litigation also. But when I go down and vote, I whip out my ID card and I show it to them. Well, you don't really have to. We're not required to ask you. And I said, I know you're not required to ask me, but I'm setting an example. Here's my ID card. I know you know me. Here's my ID card. I said, this right here is one of the only sure ways you know that it's me who's voting, even though you've known me since 1988. But we do have new people moving into town every now and then that we don't know. So when they say there's no voter fraud going on, what the anti-freedom folks are telling you is there's no prosecutions. But we have those, the O'Keefe's Veritas Project videos of Acorn getting these fraudulent registration cards and turning them in. Their voter rolls have been looked at, not any one place, but all over the country. And their people passed away that haven't been cleaned off the voter rolls. There's people who moved out. They're not even living in the precinct anymore. Might even move to another state, and they're still on the voter rolls. These things, folks, by precinct, I don't care how big your precinct is, these things by precinct can be cleaned out. Even if it isn't every year, they should at least be cleaned out the year before. And once every 4 years, they should be gone over before a presidential election year. Me, that's common sense. To me, that's a no-brainer. And honestly, and this may be a little bit of a personal attack, and I don't like going here, but it's not rocket science. And if you're against voter IDs because you think it's discriminatory and racist, I have to question about your volume of brains that you really have. Because in this day and age, in this information overload era that we're living in, if people don't know what's going on, it's willful on their parts. It really is. I know some older folks that don't get not one iota of their information from a computer. It's all out of the newspaper. And I understand that and appreciate that. But I think there's some older folks out there that know better what's going on politically than a lot of the younger generation that just accesses the internet 24/7 almost with their smartphones. I actually know some people that don't have a computer at home. They don't want to spend the money on a laptop or desktop. Everything they do is on their cell phone. And that's fine with me if you want to do that. That's great. Kudos. But they're informing themselves about all the wrong stuff, in my opinion. I mean, that's where it comes down to. They're just, in my opinion, they're informing themselves on all the wrong stuff. So we have that, and that just, like I said, that last sentence there, and the political opponents of the law failed to produce a single witness who would be unable to vote under the law in court. They couldn't do it, couldn't find them. And like I said, the one that they did find, they corrected that quickly there. Now, real quick here. Breitbart's reporting, and Breitbart's not the only one reporting this, but Breitbart's reporting that, let's see, Supreme Court, let's see here. Supreme Court declines to hear appeal backing North Carolina voter ID law. This is a UPI story. And Chief Justice John Roberts wrote a 2-page ruling noting the court's decision not to hear the case should not be considered a judgment on case merits. Now, before I finish reading that, I have another article we're going to get into about how does the Supreme Court decide what cases are going to hear. And this article says that they receive about 10,000 requests a year, and they only take about 80. So someone's got to sift through those 10,000s. I bet there's a lot of law clerks that are working overtime at the Supreme Court. Anyway, given the blizzard of filings over who is and who is not authorized to seek review in this court under North Carolina law, it is important to recall our frequent admonition that the denial of a writ of certiorari imports no expression of opinion upon the merits of the case, Roberts wrote. The High Court left in place a Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that struck down the controversial 2013 law by North Carolina's Republican-controlled legislature and signed by Governor Pat McCrory, also Republican, who was defeated in November. The judge found that the state's ballot restrictions targeted black voters with almost surgical precision. Even though they produced, the opponents of this and the judges themselves produced no evidence whatsoever. This is what the ruling came down. And this is part of the problem with our court system today. You know, there's a lot of rulings going on out there, folks. It seems like they're not even using the evidence. In the original state court that upheld the law, the Fourth Circuit should have found nothing, as far as I can read, should have found nothing wrong with this. But yet the ACLU, the Southern blah, 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 on blah, 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 social justice, Center for Social Justice, Southern Center for Social Justice, or all this, there were almost a surgical precision that they were targeting blacks, which wasn't the case at all. There's no evidence to support that. There's no facts that were submitted in evidence to actually support this. The ruling occurred before the November 16th general elections, or November 2016 general elections. Legislation restricted voting and registration in 5 ways, which disproportionately affected black voters, the lower court decided. Again, if you go back, and we did this when this happened, there was no evidence. There was not a shred of evidence that was presented at the state level that carried over into the federal courts here, the Fourth Circuit Court. Was none. But because of the biases, and these were, from what I read in other articles here, these were 3 Democratic judges. And because of the biases, because of just that one, the Southern Center for Social Justice, you know, that has a lot to say about that center. You know, that they're going, we talked about this last week about emotional politics. And they're driven, social justice tyrants are driven by pure emotion. And these judges were persuaded, in my opinion, by pure emotion. And that's bad. That's bad when we're persuaded by pure emotion. I'm not saying emotion does not have anything to do with our reasoning and decision-making whatsoever. It does. We're emotional creatures. It has to. But if that's the only thing we're relying on, just because I feel something's right doesn't mean it's right. And this is what I think happened with this. It got caught up in that. And right now, because everything's in flux in North Carolina, you have the Democrat governor, and now they want to recall this whole thing. Honestly, And in my opinion, you got a split court decision. Now, some will tell me, and probably correctly, but I don't see it this way because I'm a federalist. I'm a constitutionalist, and I'm a federalist. I believe in the state powers over the federal government's powers. And the state Supreme Court made an absolute fantastic ruling on this. There's a lot of legal scholars out there that'll agree with me on this, or I agree with them, however you want to state it. And the Fourth Circuit Court just did a horrible job in adjudicating this. I fail to see where there was any law that they cited. Again. So, let me see here. It would have taken 4 justices to consider the case. Last summer, the justices were divided 4-4 on a request to allow the law to go forward in the elections. Okay? The state's new governor, Democrat Roy Cooper, had sought to dismiss the appeal. Today's announcement is good news for North Carolina voters, Cooper said in a statement. We need to be making it easier to vote, not harder. Again, you need an ID, and we've talked about this before. You need an ID to do just about anything else to get benefits. You know, when I was seeking help with my fibromyalgia and helped me pay bills and insurance, I had to produce ID. I had to prove who I was. And I didn't get food stamps, but I know you need an ID to get food stamps. I have to show an ID if I'm buying a car, registering it and stuff like that. Show ID when we bought our house. When I bought insurance, the whole 9 yards. When I buy insurance, registering, everything, licensing the car. You have to have a photo ID to do just about practically anything else in your life. But when it comes to voting, one of the most sacred institutions, when it comes to being a republic and being a free society, voting, it's racist. It's racist for you to ask somebody to show an ID. One that the taxpayers are willing to pay for. Out of all the things taxpayers aren't willing to pay for, taxpayers, and I'm in agreement with this, I'm willing to pay for this if someone absolutely cannot afford a government or state-issued ID for the purposes of voting. I'm all for it. I'm absolutely all for it. The Southern Coalition of Social Justice, that's what it is, the Southern Coalition of Social Justice, and the American Civil Liberties Unions also applauded Monday's decision. Of course they would. And I still, to this day, again, this is a fundamental problem with anti-freedom folks that are progressives, that are Democrats, that are part of the ACLU. Who asked you to help? I've seen more times than not the ACLU poke their nose into situations I don't think they have any business being in, and then the ones that you really think that they would, that somebody is actually violating someone's civil liberties because it may be a conservative cause like, and this should not be a conservative clause, it's a constitutional clause, like a Second Amendment issue. They're nowhere to be found. In my mind, and I don't care what they think about what I think, but they're a bunch of hypocrites over there at the ACLU. And I just can't wrap my mind around these groups. Southern Coalition for Social Justice. Did they ask these people in North Carolina to stick their nose into this? I would love to see a poll. I would actually love to hear from North Carolinians if they were asked by the ACLU or the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, if they were even asked if they wanted this lawsuit to go on above the state level. They might have found 1 or 2 people, but were they aggrieved parties? And I honestly, and this is why I have a Patreon account going. And you can go to the danclemenshow.com and click on the Patreon page and just click on, support us on Patreon. It'll take you to my Patreon page over there. This is one of the reasons why I've started up a Patreon, other than to actually support myself on the show, but to actually grow the show, have researchers and maybe even have some investigative reporters that we can actually sic on issues like this, because this would be perfect. This issue here in North Carolina would be perfect for investigative reporter to find out about the ACLU and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, who they actually got that said they were aggrieved, and do some investigating on those folks and see if they voted in the past, see if they're actually driving a car or doing anything else you need a driver's license for, which is an ID, and see if they're actually aggrieved or not. I have my own opinions about it, and they're just, I'm just assuming things. I don't like assuming things, but I'll bet you $1 to the dozen donuts that they're not actually aggrieved. And this is the problem with litigation in the United States today. It just really is. So we have those two things there, okay? I only have about, let me get back over here real quick on my timer. We've got about 9 minutes left. Okay. Not that I've beaten a dead dog to death here, but we're going to save the voter fraud for tomorrow. I got links up in the show notes today. We'll actually bring this up up again tomorrow with other pertinent news that might be happening right now as we speak. But by all means, please go to thedanclemenshow.com. The link is in the information below the video for the danclemenshow.com. I do not put my show notes in the YouTube video. It just gets too long there. That's why I put the danclemenshow.com, the show notes page, link in there so you can go over and look at these things. There's a PDF I'd like you to go read if you have the time. The Pew Center on the State's Inaccurate, Costly, and Inefficient Evidence That America's Voter Registration System Needs an Upgrade. And I think it needs an upgrade, but I think it goes towards freedom, goes towards accuracy in the vote, truing the vote. There's actually a group out there that's their mission in life, is truing the vote. Make sure that those that are voting are actually allowed to vote in that precinct. They're eligible to vote. There's another group out there, George Soros-backed group out there, Let America Vote, that is against voter ID. Is totally against anything that has to do with making sure that you are who you say you are and you're eligible to vote in this precinct and you're only voting once. They're totally against all that. Totally. And that's, honestly, folks, with just that narrative there, that's all you need to know about these people, how anti-freedom they are. Because they're Indiana, all you got to do is Google this. It's very knowable, very searchable. Indiana, after they passed their voter ID laws, saw an uptick in minority voting, especially blacks. And they're actually asking black folks in Indiana, did you vote before? No, because I didn't feel my vote counted. But now with the voter ID, I know only people that are eligible to vote can vote, so my vote counts. And there's a lot of people, I don't care what your skin color is, it feels the same way. That with voter ID, my vote counts. Okay? Real quick here, as I said Friday, I wanted to get into this, and so I'm going to. I don't want to be made a liar here. Net neutrality. Big in the news because FCC now is revisiting that, talking about getting rid of this. I've seen videos on YouTube and also over on my other channel, which I got to get set up in here, a page for that, VidMe. Now, VidMe, I can't do a live show like this. I can't upload this big of a show over there. They're limited to so many minutes on their videos, but it's an alternative site to YouTube that I'm starting to use. But even over there, I've been watching this, and almost to a person on YouTube, and with rare exception, they're all for net neutrality. But honestly, they've been sold a bill of goods on net neutrality. Basically, what net neutrality is the government, through the FCC, under the Barack Obama administration, decided that the internet should be a Class 2 utility, or Category 2, whatever you want to call it, utility. That means people can't live without it. Just like electricity, which any utilities that are brought in, like electricity, natural gas, even telephones for a while, I think were described as a Class 2 utility, although I think that's going by the wayside because of cellular communications. Now, the the big thing with net neutrality here is about all these internet service providers are going to collude together, and you're only going to have one option to get on the internet, and then they're going to jack the prices up. So what happens? Well, what happened during net neutrality? Well, the government come in and said you cannot force people of higher, and what the argument was, real quick, let me back up a second. Netflix, at the time net neutrality was put in under the Obama administration, accounted for like 1/3 or 30% of all the internet traffic. And they weren't, some of the providers wanted to make them pay a little bit more for that heavier use. Okay? Same type of reasoning. The folks that put products in grocery stores, they pay a premium price to have their products on the shelves at eye level. You know, same reasoning. Thank God the government isn't in the stores yet trying to decide where these goods should go, or, well, you can't do that. You can't charge a little bit more for one over another. And this is the problem when government gets in. They haven't done it to grocery stores yet, and a lot of people don't even notice it. A lot of people don't even know that that's going on. And that's called the free market, baby. It's a good thing. But what happens when what happened when net neutrality came in was they classified this as a class 2 or category 2 utility. Therefore, the government could start regulating it. And the narrative was a false, fake narrative. They actually lying to you, because there's more ways to get on the internet now than there was 10 years ago. My son has a cell phone that is not even carried by a cell phone provider. His is all on a wireless network. Okay, Wi-Fi network. His cell phone works on it. Works pretty good. So it runs off of that, you know. And there's actually, out in our area, and I know a lot of other areas, I could actually get my internet through a Wi-Fi hotspot in the area. That's not being supplied by our cable provider at all. And so when they tell you about net neutrality, first off, most of them I've read or listened to, not read, but listened to on YouTube and VidMe and that, they really don't know what you're talking about. Second, the big heavy users. And see, without net neutrality, then the IPs and the cellular companies and stuff like that, for the big heavy users, they would charge you a premium for that. Okay? What's the problem with that? There are a lot of YouTubers out there, and also on VidMe, that upload multiple videos every day. And that takes bandwidth. And they might be considered, on a certain tier, if they break it down into so many tiers, they might be considered a heavier user, so they're going to have to pay more for that bandwidth to do that. Right now, and this is you're going to laugh when I use this term, because this is a progressive Democrat term that they use, the freeloaders. Unions use that term a lot. Freeloaders or free riders. But that's exactly what these folks are. They're benefiting from net neutrality, so they don't have to pay extra for their cable connection because of the bandwidth. And so if net neutrality goes away, then their ISP is going to be able to force them to pay. If they don't, then they'll be throttled back after a certain amount of bandwidth being used. I mean, that's the way it is. That's called the free market. In order for me to produce this show and actually get it out, I had to go up to the next tier on my cable. And I was willing to pay for that. And if it comes down to it in the future, if I had to pay a little extra to do this show in the future, okay. You know, that's the cost of doing business. I can't expect these people to do it for free. And one real quick thing here before we end. This is the problem with the electrical utilities. This is the problem when the government comes in and creates monopolies. The electric grid in this country needs upgraded a lot. Lines, transformers, the whole 9 yards. But it was through the artificial suppressing of the cost of electricity over the years that has caused the electric companies not to have enough money to pay for the upgrades and upkeeps, because the government would not let them charge at a fair market value or fair market rate, okay, in the system. And that's what happens when the government comes in and regulates things and they create government-created monopolies. If you have any more questions about this, don't hesitate to email me. Just go to danclemisshow.com, click on the contact, and email me about this. I know we'll be talking about this more in the future. That's the music there. Again, I apologize for those on Blog Talk Radio and everything that missed the show in the morning because I forgot to do it. My brain was just elsewhere this weekend. I do apologize. It's been the Dan Clemens Show. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day. We'll see you tomorrow at noon. God bless.